Greetings and salutations, friends and gamers of all stripes. I am GM Dave, your man behind the screen, and I'd like to welcome you to the first episode of Striving for Greatness, a series where I will be sharing tips and advice on how you can work towards becoming a truly awesome player for any tabletop game. To begin this series, we're going to take a look at the basic elements that comprise the foundation of any great player or any great GM for that matter. After all, your GMs are players too. They just happen to be filling a larger and more involved role with greater responsibilities. The bedrock upon which all great players and GMs are built goes by a number of names, but the one I prefer most is the one used by fellow tabletop gaming YouTuber Seth Skorkowski, the RPG Social Contract. So what is the RPG Social Contract? Put simply, it's the agreement everyone makes the moment they choose to be part of a gaming group that they will adhere to the following as often as possible. Players will 1. Do your absolute best to be in attendance for the game when it's scheduled, or if you can't be, let your group know as soon as possible. 2. Respect your fellow players and GM by being attentive, engaging with the game, allowing your friends time in the spotlight, and not being disruptive. 3. Respect the rulings of your GM, even if you do not agree with them, and don't interrupt the game to address them. Save your thoughts to discuss after the game instead. 4. Respect the work that your GM has put into the game by doing your best not to divert too far from what they've prepared. And lastly, but most importantly, 5. Do your very best to have fun at the table and help the others at your table have fun as well. For GMs, you will 1. Make sure to schedule your games and be in attendance on the days scheduled. 2. Respect your players by being attentive to what they're doing, engaging with the game, providing each of them a chance to the spotlight, not being disruptive, and allowing them the freedom to play the way they like. 3. Be firm and fair with your rulings. Listen to your players when they have a complaint or a compliment, and consider their point of view. 4. Do not force your players to play the game exactly the way you want it to turn out. If you're going to do that, well then you might as well just write your own story instead. Allow them to explore the game you've prepared with the pace and methods that they prefer. 5. Again, most importantly, do your very best to have fun and help the others at your table have fun as well. As you can see, there's a lot of similarity here, and there's good reason for that. Although the players and the GM comprise the two separate parties involved in this contract, and although their roles, involvement, and responsibility within the game do differ, at their core, they are all still players at the same game. A GM cannot play their part without their players, nor can the players play their part without GMs. As such, it's important to make sure that the foundation upon which you all build your skills is similarly built. Speaking of that foundation, let's dig a little bit deeper and break down exactly why each of these parts is so important. Scheduling and attendance. This one should be pretty obvious to most of us. After all, how can we possibly play if no one is showing up? More than this, though, good attendance is a sign of respect to the people that you're sharing your time with. It says to them that not only do you want to play with them, but that you respect their time enough to make sure that you're there as well. Scheduling the games is the GM specific side of this point, and it's one that cannot be stressed enough. Failure to schedule games or keep your players informed of that schedule is both the fastest and one of the most common ways for tabletop games to die. Fortunately, keeping on top of this task is simple to do, especially once you've relegated it to a habit. One of the easiest ways to do this is to make sure that you're consistent in the time you set. One example would be setting your game for every 2 weeks at 7 p.m. on Saturdays. Just make sure if you're playing online, when you're setting up your times and your schedules, that you account for the time zones of your players as well. One easy trip up that a lot of people make in this digital information age is forgetting the fact that we don't all live in the same area. Respecting the people at the table. Another major part of the contract is respecting the other people at your table. This is the number one way to foster a healthy gaming environment, and there are a few ways that you can do this. Chief among these are simple things like paying attention during other people's turns, not talking over the other players, allowing everyone to have a chance in the spotlight, and being engaged and attentive during your game. However, these are not the only aspects at play here. Putting away distracting items or closing down distracting programs if playing online are great ways to show respect for your players. So is chipping in with snacks and drinks if you're sharing the table. Speaking of sharing the table, if you are playing in person, Don't forget to be mindful of the fact that you're going to be sharing a close space for a few hours. If you've been working outside or cleaning up after pets or any other form of physical activity that leaves you smelling and looking a little less than pleasant, do your friends the courtesy of giving yourself enough time to clean yourself up before coming. By the way, full props go to Seth Skorkowski for bringing up this important point, one that often gets overlooked in videos like these. And since we're still on the subject of cleanliness, if you're hosting the game at your home, do what you can to keep the game area clean and tidy as well. Take out the trash, wipe down the table if it's dirty, have your dishes clean and ready to use, and so on. I know I might sound a little bit like your nagging mother here, but remember that you're not just inviting your friends into your home, you're inviting them to use that close and very personal space with you. Be fair with GM rulings. Whether the player or the GM, everybody needs to be fair in how they handle the GM's rulings at the table. Players, if you find yourself disagreeing with a ruling your GM made, or if you find yourself disagreeing with a player that takes umbrage with a ruling, do not interrupt the game to air your grievances at length. You can and should make mention of it, but if your GM makes a ruling, you need to respect that until such time as the session has ended. Remember, part of respecting the people at your table is not being unduly disruptive, and interrupting the game to complain at length about a ruling is one of the most disruptive things anyone can do at the table. GMs, be firm with your ruling, but don't shut your players out. Hand-waving your players' suggestions away, or worse still, ignoring them entirely, is quite possibly the most disrespectful thing you can do to your players short of insulting them directly. Just as you expect them to respect your rulings, you should return that respect by hearing them out after the game. You don't always have to take what they say to heart, but you should always consider the complaints or the suggestions they come to you with. Do them the courtesy of listening to what they have to say. Consider it for yourself, and then explain to them clearly why you will or will not be changing your ruling based on what they suggest. Respect the GM's work and the player's freedoms. We've all been in this situation. The GM has planned your session for the night, but the players get distracted with things that don't have much to do with what was planned. Well, you know what? That's okay, as long as it stays within a reasonable limit, that is. Players, try to do your GMs the kindness of not diverting too far from what they have planned for you. You obviously do not have to follow this to the letter. You should, of course, be playing in the manner that you and your fellow players can all enjoy, but don't forget, the GM is a fellow player too, and they've probably put a lot of time and effort into preparing your sessions. Do not disrespect them by derailing that completely, and especially not by doing that intentionally. That's just a straight up dick move. GMs, bear in mind that this is a world you made for your players to play and have fun in. If they're enjoying exploring the town you made or talking with the random NPC you didn't have anything prepared for instead of going straight for the dungeon you prepared, that's okay. Your players are having fun, and you should foster that by allowing them the freedom to do so. That said, don't be afraid to get the game back on track if things have moved a little too far off to the side, especially if the fun that was being had in character has suddenly moved out of character. Part of your job is to keep the game on track. You just need to make sure it doesn't come at the expense of your players' enjoyment. Do your best to have fun. This is a game and a hobby that we are meant to share and enjoy together. However, sometimes we're going to run into situations where we're just not feeling like playing. This is completely understandable, and it happens to everybody. Just remember, your enjoyment isn't the only thing at stake here, especially as the GM. As such, do your best before every session to leave yourself as open to having fun in the game as possible. In his own video on the subject, Seth Skorkowski suggests telling yourself, either out loud or in your head, whatever happens, I'm going to have fun today. I will fully admit that this solution sounds incredibly corny, but having used it myself, I find that it is actually much more effective than it may initially seem. This isn't the only thing you can do to get yourself hyped up for a game that you're not too excited for, or to help someone else get ready for it as well. Talking in your character's voice before a game could be a great way to build up that feeling of excitement for the session to come, as can directly engaging with your fellow players in character. The GM could do this too through the use of NPCs that directly address players who may not seem as involved. Working together to provide one another the means to get engaged in your games is a fantastic way to ensure that your sessions will turn out to be fun, even if things don't necessarily go as well as you might have liked. Lastly, if you find that somebody is really struggling to get into the fun and just isn't feeling it, remember you can always just talk to them as friends. Sometimes we're just plain not in the frame of mind that's right for gaming. This can make it hard for anyone to get excited to play using in-game means, doubly so if we're having to do this for ourselves. In those cases, feel free to talk about it out of character, just as friends. Do be aware that you need to respect boundaries though. If someone really does not want to talk about whatever's got them down, don't push them too hard. You really don't want to make it feel like you're trying to force them to share with you whatever's got them in their funk, as something like that can be very damaging to someone's friendship. Well, friends and gamers, that's about all that I have for you today. If you enjoyed this video and found it informative, please feel free to leave a like and a comment. I always appreciate good discussion on these topics, and I would love to hear your thoughts on what constitutes the basics of being a great player. If you're interested in seeing more of my content, consider subscribing and following me on social media, links in the description below. What's more, if you would like to explore this topic in even greater detail, I implore that you check out Seth Skorkowski's video on the subject. Once again, a link will be in the description for this as well, and do consider subscribing to his channel too. Personally, I have found him to be one of the absolute best tabletop YouTubers around, and I must admit that I find the fact that he doesn't have more followers something of a travesty. With all that said, dear friends and gamers, it is my sincerest hope as always that you roll high, roleplay well, and game on.